She walks on the sacred marbles as if treading a living altar. With each step, the sound of her adorned ankles echoes like a profane liturgy among columns carved with the names of forgotten gods. She carries no incense, chants no hymns, raises no offerings. Her body is the sacrifice itself. Her gaze, covered by veils of damp linen and sprinkled with myrrh powder, is a closed book that only the boldest priests would dare decipher. She is not just any woman. She is a hierodule, a sacred prostitute. She who, with a gesture of her hand or the touch of an anointed thigh, sealed alliances between kings, confirmed oracles, and made the fate of empires hang on a sigh. She does not sell herself for coin. She demands sacredness. Her bed is a throne, her nakedness a pact. In the temple where prayers mingle with sweat and ecstasy with redemption, she reigns. Because there, amidst purple veils, Phoenician tapestries, and eternal lamps, sex wasn't a sin, it was a bridge, and pleasure, an offering. While men believed they dominated, she was the one who decided. The veil of the Holy of Holies, after all, also hid the feminine. And what you're about to see, no one would dare tell you, until now. They say there was a secret door in the Temple of Jerusalem. It wasn't made of gold or Lebanese cedar. It was made of flesh, and through it passed oracles, pacts, and sacred vices. Behind it stood not the Levites, nor the scribes, nor the prophets, but women, thousands of them, hidden in ritual, silence, with eyes lined with Egyptian kohl, mouths stained with pomegranate, and bodies prepared not for common lust, but for rituals that fused flesh and spirit, power and ecstasy, faith and divine submission. A lineage of priestesses invisible to the eyes of official history, but essential behind the scenes of thrones and altars. In this video, we will open this door, reveal the erased names, the forbidden acts, the secrets sealed by ancient pacts. But only at the end will you understand the true reason why ancient faith so needed the female body, and why they did everything to erase it from the sacred texts. If this beginning has already sparked something in you, if the ancient whisper touched your chest even before the first name was revealed, leave your like as if you were marking the floor of a forgotten temple, and sign up now before this secret becomes silence again, because what comes next is just the beginning of what has been hidden for millennia, the oldest. Civilizations never separated the sacred from the sensorial. On the contrary, they built their religions on the flesh, on instincts, on the mystery of pleasure as a language of the gods. Long before the prohibitions, the dogmas, and the moralistic structures that would emerge over the centuries, there was a time when the body was a temple, touch was liturgy, and desire was considered a direct bridge to the divine. It was in this world of intense aromas and nocturnal chants that sacred prostitutes flourished, women consecrated not to vulgar lust, but to the most ancient and feared spiritual office, transforming human ecstasy into communion with the invisible. We are not in Rome, nor in Greece, but in Ur, in Babylon, in Canaan, where the stars were read in the pools and women's wombs were considered oracles. In these territories, the feminine was neither feared nor silenced. It was celebrated. The temples dedicated to Ishtar, Astarte, or Anat, goddesses of fertility, war, and love, were places of absolute power, and within their walls, carved with astral symbols and inscriptions in cuneiform, walked the hierodules, priestesses of mystical pleasure, trained from childhood to know not only the secrets of the flesh, but the enigmas of the spirit. They knew the ancient names of the stars, the hidden maps of the male body, the sibilant chants that awakened the sleeping gods. Their hands healed, their mouths sealed pacts, their bodies were sacred ground. During the Earth's renewal festivities, kings did not kneel before altars, but before them. The ritual of hierogamy, the sacred union between sovereign and priestess, was a cosmic performance that ensured the fertility of the soil, peace on the borders, and the blessing of the heavens. And every detail was meticulously orchestrated. The perfume used, the tone of the music, the flavor of the wine, the position of the stars, the cycle of the moon. Nothing was vulgar. Everything was profoundly ritualistic, because there, amid colorful veils and chants repeated to the sound of tambourines, pleasure was a sacrament, the temple the cosmic womb, and the woman the key. But with the arrival of new religions, the hardening of doctrines, and the deliberate erasure of the female voice in theology, these women were condemned to oblivion. Their names disappeared from the clay tablets. Their rites were called profane. Their bodies, once altars, became taboo. The sacred prostitute became a scandal. Her temple became heresy. Her presence became sin. And the world then began to fear what it once worshipped, the power of the sacred feminine. But memory is not erased by silence. It lives in the bones of buried palaces, in the fragments of poetry hidden in sealed chambers, in the whispers that still echo on the cold walls of ancient temples. And in this video, we will unearth not only the story of these women, but the entire system that used eroticism as a pillar of faith. We will pull back the curtains of official history, enter the secret passages of forgotten spirituality, and light the lamps extinguished by morality. The temple still stands, it's just covered in dust, and we will enter. The temple was not just a building of stone and gold, it was a living, breathing organism, where every wall breathed secrets and every column supported not only the roof, but also the invisible weight of collective belief. There was no separation between the sacred and the sensory. Everything was an aesthetic, performance of spiritual power. By passing through its carved porticos, the common man left behind the world of logic and entered a realm where symbols, scents, and forms conspired to lead him to ecstasy. The temple was labyrinth and womb, fortress and stage, prison and liberation. And at the center of it all, a bed. The main entrance was an open mouth carved with curved, almost feminine forms. The spiral staircases mimicked the serpentine movement of life energy, causing the visitor to lose track of time and direction. The stained glass windows, when they existed, tinged the light with shades of purple and amber, colors reserved for royalty and mysticism. Dense fabrics hung from the ceiling like veils from the goddess's womb. Carpets embroidered with constellations and astral symbols guided the pilgrim as if treading the sky. It was not an architecture meant to protect from the rain. It was an architecture meant to lead to surrender. In the center was the sanctum, the most sacred space where the invisible touched the visible. There was no traditional ark or altar, but rather a raised bed adorned with Egyptian linens, pillows stuffed with myrrh and lotus petals, bronze lamps, and behind it, a gold mosaic depicting the union of the goddess and the king. It was the stage of the hierogamy, and only the initiated could enter. The walls bore inscriptions in dead languages, invocations that blended the names of gods with phrases of forbidden love. In secret niches, small, female statues with exposed breasts and bellies marked with lunar symbols spied on the ritual like silent witnesses. Fountains of scented water ran through the corridors, creating a constant sound, like a divine breath that never ceased. It was impossible to walk there without feeling one's body react. The skin prickled, the blood heated, the spirit trembled. But there was a reason for all this. Architecture wasn't just aesthetic, it was a trap for the soul. Every rounded form, every sensually carved sculpture, every column sculpted like a woman's body, all conspired to weaken reason and awaken instinct. And it was in this state of mystical vulnerability that the faithful encountered the hierodule. She didn't appear as an ordinary figure. She descended hidden staircases, emerging from behind veils shrouded in amber light and thick incense. The temple's construction was designed to make her appear like an apparition, a goddess incarnate. And so, between the stones of power and the fabrics of temptation, architecture fulfilled its supreme role, making the body a channel, the temple a womb, and faith a total surrender. The man who entered there rarely left the same, because even if he returned to the world, something in him remained imprisoned between those columns. Perhaps a sigh, perhaps a sin, perhaps a secret. The most enduring alliances of antiquity were sealed not with ink or blood, but with perfume. They were agreements not written, but kissed, treaties not signed, but rather lain down. In a world where the borders of empires blurred between deserts and sacred rivers, women became bridges between kingdoms, coins of living gold, pieces on a silent chessboard where eroticism was the most diplomatic language. And in the hands of kings, these women were offerings. But behind the scenes of power, they were strategists, and sometimes true queens. Each foreign wife who entered the palaces of great sovereigns brought with her more than jewels, dowries, or exotic fabrics. She brought the scent of her land, the voice of her gods, the customs of her lineage, and the gaze of an entire people waiting to be represented. She was a political presence, not a romantic one. and the more powerful the nation of origin, the more majestic the wife should be. The king's bed became a treaty room and orgasm, a peace pact. The woman's body was the territory where war or armistice was decided. Behind the curtains of the sacred harem, a web of invisible tensions formed. The royal wives organized themselves like miniature kingdoms, each with their own maids, their own informants, their own strategies for rapprochement. Gifts were exchanged as bait, glances sent like arrows, perfumes used as traps. Desire was cultivated as one cultivates poison, with slowness, precision, and intention, because winning the king's eye wasn't just vanity, it was security, it was influence, it was territory conquered without a single drop of bloodshed. And amidst this silent chess game stood the hierodules, those who came not by marriage but by summons. They were feared and desired by their wives. It was known that with a gesture or a word, they could turn the sovereign's heart and shatter alliances forged for years. They were neutral but dangerous. They had no family, no homeland. They belonged to the temple, but they carried on their shoulders the weight of power that no crown could contain. Each night in the royal bedchamber was a choice, and each woman, summoned, bore in her braided hair the hope of a people or the ambition of an empire. Some offered spiced wine to loosen the king's tongue. Others danced until the floor throbbed. Some whispered advice in the aftermath of lovemaking. Others simply wept silently, aware that there in that bed the future of their children and the fate of their blood were being decided. History has never told how many kingdoms were saved by a kiss, how many wars were averted by a well-directed orgasm, how many treaties were destroyed by a jealous glance across the palace corridors. Desire in those days wasn't weakness, it was politics, it was calculation, it was dominance, and so the women of the temple and palace, though silently, though veiled, shaped the map of the ancient world, not with swords but with their bodies. And there is no greater glory than that which arises unnoticed, yet transforms everything around it. No woman entered the king's bed without first passing through the liquid womb of preparation. Seduction didn't begin with a look nor a touch. It began with the water, and this water in itself was sacred. It wasn't just any spring, any basin, any liquid. It was gathered from wells protected by priests, blessed under the chants of the elder matriarchs, perfumed with flowers that bloomed only at night. It was living, vibrant water, meant to touch the skin like a spirit. And while the world outside burned with dust and war, within the women's chambers, the secret rite that united flesh and eternity began. The female hierodules and even their wives were led naked under light veils to the purification chambers. There, they stripped themselves not only of their clothes, but also of their worldly identities. The pharaoh's daughter, the princess of Media, the temple servant, all upon immersing themselves in the water, became essence again. Their bodies were rubbed with cedar oils, myrrh resin, saffron powder, cinnamon bark, and macerated bay leaves, a perfume that penetrated the skin and told a story. The touch of the women's hands was slow, circular, as if drawing runes on the belly. Each movement was an invocation, each sigh a spell. Then came the anointing. Oil heated in alabaster jars was slowly poured over the crown of the head, running down the nape of the neck, shoulders, breasts, thighs, and down to the feet. The body was anointed like an altar. There was no rush. The purification was a ritual lasting hours. Nails were dyed with henna. Eyes were lined with dark kohl. Hair was braided with gold thread, amber stones, and feathers from sacred birds. Even the lips were coated with a mixture of pomegranate and honey so that the kiss would taste like forbidden fruit. The fabrics chosen to cover the body were not just adornments. They were messages. A blue tunic indicated spiritual openness. A purple veil hinted at royalty and mystery. A necklace with green stones was worn to protect the womb. Bells attached to the ankles, discreet, marked the rhythm of the approach. There were no words, only sound, scent, touch. The woman was prepared as if she were a living offering, and she was. An offering that walked, breathed, dominated. Before nightfall, the elders whispered advice in forgotten languages. How to look, when to breathe, what to say at the end of the act. These were codes passed down from generation to generation, invisible to the scribes, but engraved in the flesh of the initiates. The knowledge of seduction was oral, bodily, intuitive, and sacred. The hierodules knew that one gesture could open the heart of a king, and that one mistake could seal the death of a nation. Therefore, They danced as if the world depended on the rhythm of their hips, and it did. In the dim light of the temple, with lamps casting slow shadows on the walls, the female body became a living scripture. Her pores breathed prophecy. Perfumes ignited the soul. Seduction wasn't conquest, it was invocation, and only those who had passed through the fire of purification could touch the throne of the flesh, because before being a woman, she was a rite, she was a passage, she was priesthood. What if true power wasn't in crowns, but in secret rituals of beauty and seduction? Comment below. Which detail of the feminine rites impressed you the most? The perfume, the look, or the silence? There was a chamber in the palace that was not on the maps, nor mentioned by the scribes. A chamber veiled by 7 curtains, guarded by mute eunuchs, where no general ever entered, no prophet ever spoke, no servant ever looked directly. It was the place where power stripped itself of its weapons and surrendered itself to the sacred vulnerability of pleasure. The king's bedchamber, but not just any bedchamber. It was a temple of seduction, built not of walls but of atmosphere. It was a trap for the senses, a liturgy incarnate, a sanctuary where politics dissolved in the perfume of the flesh. The walls were covered with tapestries imported from Tyre and Babylon, dyed with mollusk blood and embroidered with lunar symbols that only the women of the temple could interpret. There were rare feather pillows, lined with amber-soaked Egyptian linen, arranged in ritualistic circles around a central bed, which was not just a bed. It was a carved wooden altar adorned with figures of entwined serpents and open flowers in full botanical orgasm. The ceiling was mirrored with polished bronze, so that the king, upon lying down, would see himself in submission, a silent reminder that here the throne belonged to the woman. The room was scented with thick incense made from myrrh, cypress resin, lotus petals, and a forbidden essence extracted from a flower that bloomed only once a year beside graves. The lamps, lit in symmetrical circles, cast shadows that danced like ancient spirits. There was music, not ordinary melodies, but dissonant sounds of instruments that imitated the throbbing of the womb, the whisper of the belly, the echo of the first waters. Each note was chosen to open a part of the body and of the soul. When the woman entered, she was unannounced. She appeared like an apparition. The veils fell slowly. The sound of bells on her ankles marked the beginning of the ritual. She took her time. Time there obeyed not clockwork but desire. He walked slowly, his bare feet touching the black marble floor as if activating invisible portals. The king waited in silence, naked, or nearly so, adorned with gold necklaces and bracelets, but for the first time without a crown. She looked into his eyes and saw the boy behind the monarch, the fear behind the fury, the loneliness behind the glory. And that was where the true rite began, not with touch, but with a look. Because the hierodule knew that dominating a man's body was easy. The challenge was to tame his soul, and this was done with silence, with breathing, with presence. The room then became a sacred theater, the woman's body, a living incense, her hands, instruments of prophecy, her gestures, unspoken prayers. She touched him as if she were touching the world, and when pleasure finally became inevitable, it wasn't an explosion, it was an offering, a mutual sacrifice, the surrender of a king, the ascension of a goddess. The next morning, the scribes would record military victories, trade agreements, and royal decrees, but they would mention nothing of what truly ruled the kingdom. That night, in that room, amid veils, shadows, and sweat, because they knew that what happened there was older than any throne and mightier than any sword. There were no screams, no lashes, no blood spilled on marble, but there was war, a silent, constant war, where the weapon was perfume, the shield was a smile, and the poison dripped in sweet words. In the sacred harem, where concubines, royal wives, and hierodaughters circled like planets around a single man's sun, peace was a fragile illusion, sustained by intrigues, alliances, and glances that spoke louder than any decree. It was a war where people didn't kill us but extinguished, where people didn't conquer but seduced. Each woman there wasn't just skin, breasts, and perfumed thighs. She was lineage, territory, and legacy. A daughter of Egypt represented more than her beauty. She was the shadow of an ancient treaty. A princess of Sidon brought with her the promise of sea routes. A Moabite, the risk of espionage. And each hierodule who entered the royal chamber carried within her body not only the sacred, but also the threat, that of being chosen, that of being remembered, that of making the king forget all others. Rivalries didn't explode, they hissed. They were sewn into notes left under pillows, into perfumes exchanged on purpose, into small scratches during communal baths. Alliances were formed in intimate dinners, in unforbidden caresses, in knowing smiles between concubines from enemy lands, because in the harem, the common enemy was oblivion, and the only scarce commodity was the king's gaze. Some banded together to overthrow a favorite, others paid servants to spread rumors about a rival's sterility. There were slow-acting poisons hidden in beauty balms, spells whispered in forbidden languages, inverted prayers uttered in the wee hours of the morning. The invisible war was made of subtleties, a torn tunic, a swapped bracelet, a bone comb purposefully placed on the king's table. The woman who lost the war wasn't banished, she was forgotten. And this, oblivion, was true death. And then there were the spies, women trained to extract secrets between moans, to uncover political intentions amidst pleasure. They slept with ministers, advisors, ambassadors. They smiled as they gathered information. Then silently, they poured their secrets into the ear of the most influential wife, or the hieroduler who knew how to use them. At the center of this shadow play stood the king, believing himself to be the center of the universe, when in fact he was the moving piece. The women enveloped him like dancing serpents, and he, enchanted, failed to notice that as he closed his eyes after each night of pleasure, a new plot was woven around him. It was a theater without curtains, a battlefield lined with cushions and silence, where every step, every piece of jewelry, every word carried the weight of destiny. And even those who seemed submissive, kneeling in prayer, were merely choosing the right moment to strike. Because in the harem, those who knew how to wait, knew how to win. The female womb was the true throne of empires, more than the gold in the coffers, more than the swords in the arsenals, more than the agreements sealed between distant kingdoms. It was the woman's womb that decided the future. And in the king's harem, each pregnancy was a war won. Each child born was a position of power conquered. Each heartbeat of a baby wrapped in silks was a seed planted in the soil of tomorrow. No hierodule, no concubine, no wife carried a child without knowing that her body was now the stage for silent disputes, where love and ambition danced intertwined. The women who bore the king's children were not merely lovers, they became invisible queens. Each birth was accompanied by celebrations, yes, but also by calculations. Was the child born to a foreign princess? What alliance would be strengthened? Was it born to a hierodule? Will it have legitimacy? To a favored wife? Then the threat to the others multiplied, and the milk that nourished the newborn prince could carry more than nourishment. It could contain the promise of a future, or the poison of a hidden plan. The care of children was not left to just any hand. Mothers competed for the best tutors, the most faithful servants, the sweetest singers to rock their heirs to sleep. Some boys were raised as warriors, others as scribes, others as priests, depending on the mother's strategy, because she knew a cultured son could become a counselor, a strong son, a general, a pious son, a prophet, and all potential kings. The woman who best shaped her son shaped the kingdom. In the palace corridors, among columns bathed in soft morning light, it was common to see children running, playing, learning, unaware that they were already being used as pawns in their mother's game. The child wasn't just joy, it was an investment, and behind the kisses, the caresses, the lullabies, lay plans, fears, and ancient tactics. Every maternal gesture was simultaneously affection and politics. And there were also the forgotten children, those born to women of no prestige who were kept away from the king's eyes. They lived in the shadows with simple clothes and watchful eyes. But some of these, as they grew up, became the most dangerous, fueled by the pain of exclusion and the ambition of a mother who whispered promises of revenge as she rocked them to sleep. Because the most lethal power is not that which is flaunted, but that which is hidden. In the end, the harem was not a place of pleasure, it was a breeding ground for heirs. And every woman knew if she couldn't conquer the king, let her conquer the future. If she couldn't use her body, let her use her blood. Because love passes, desire fades, perfume fades, but a child is forever. And with it, the mother's name. The woman who bore the heir was indeed the one who created destiny, and few dared forget this. No decree was signed, but the future was decided between cradles and whispers. Comment below. Was the true power on the throne, or in the wombs of the women who molded the heirs? The king, though crowned by his people, was surrounded by women from distant lands, languages he barely understood, gestures he had not learned in childhood, and God, who did not belong to his altar. And yet he accepted them, because each foreign wife brought with her a pact, an alliance, a promise of stability. But along with the diplomatic gifts, the rare fabrics, the vases of spices, and the peace treaties, they also brought their own gods, hidden within the folds of their robes, tattooed beneath their hair, carved into small idols that slept at the foot of their beds. And soon, the palace that once echoed a single divine name began to resound with the whispers of many. It wasn't a direct affront, it was a gentle diversion, like the current of a river that gradually changes. A prayer said in a foreign language at dawn, incense that burned with an unusual aroma, a chant sung before. Bathing not included in the rituals of the local temple, but little by little, altars began to multiply, first in discreet rooms, then in interior gardens, until small chapels appeared in the most hidden corridors. There, women gathered in secret to invoke the names of foreign deities, to play forbidden instruments, to sing hymns that would never have a place in official ceremonies. And the king allowed it. He allowed it because he saw no threat, or because he saw fascination. The goddesses the women brought were beautiful, sensual, adorned with serpents, crescent moons, 8-pointed stars, and eyes lined in deep black. They were deities who promised fertility, pleasure, vision, and dominion. Astarte, Ishtar, Asherah, names whispered with reverence and desire. And the king, after nights of absolute pleasure with women who danced to these invocations, began to wonder, why not? Why deny what gave him so much pleasure? And so, syncretism crept in, a different offering on the temple table, a foreign statue among the local columns, an anointing ritual with elements that didn't belong to tradition. The people didn't see it. The priests pretended not to notice, but the scribes began to tremble. They knew the one faith was being diluted, that the king's heart was divided, that the sacred was being corrupted not by force but by enchantment. And the most dangerous of spells is the one that seduces while smiling. The intermingling of gods was more than heresy. It was political weakness. For a king without a single altar is a king without identity. A king who bends his knee before many deities no longer reigns over any. But how can one resist the touch of a wife who weeps and sings in the name of the mother goddess of her land? How can one refuse the incense that ignited the pleasure of the last night? How can one deny the offering of a cult that brought the longed-for heir? And so, the sacred palace became a broken mirror. Each shard reflected a different god. Each woman, a different faith. Each night, a new liturgy. Religion, once an instrument of cohesion, was now a stage for confusion. The official temple remained intact, but inside, it was already contaminated. The whispers that once enlivened the palace corridors now carried a weight. The same aromas that perfumed the king's rooms began to disturb the priests. The songs that once sounded like praise began to sound like disguised laments. The gentle footsteps of the hierodules, once synonymous with blessing and communion, became omens. Something was breaking, and it wasn't the gold of the columns or the bricks of the temple, it was the soul of the kingdom. The king no longer dreamed of the days when he walked among his people. His eyes had grown accustomed to the dim light of the perfumed rooms, his ears to the music of the harems, his heart to the sweetness of the feminine voices that promised him eternal love and divine fidelity, even when they lied. He had stopped consulting the oracles, broken his fasts, ignored the warnings. The prophecies became bothersome, the prophets inconvenient. Pleasure was easier, warmer, more present. High in the temple, where once only the solemn chanting of the Levites could be heard, now echoed foreign voices, invocations in unholy tongues, dances that were not part of the ancient liturgy. And in the hidden halls, the women of the palace, wives, concubines, hierodules, continued their silent war, now waged not just for power, but for spiritual control. Each one pulled the king to a different altar, each one claiming that her goddess was the true one, that her worship was more effective, that her faith was sweeter. The king, lost in veils, forgot his origin. The people began to feel it. The rains became scarce. The crops failed. The borders became vulnerable. The enemies advanced. And the crowd, not understanding the real cause, murmured. Some said the gods were angry. Others, that lust had invaded the Holy of Holies. Some, more courageous, whispered that the throne was contaminated, not by blood but by perfume, a perfume that had been sweet and was now rotten. The priests finally spoke, loudly. They denounced syncretism, spiritual promiscuity, and the corruption of worship. They called for purification, for fire, for repentance, but it was too late. The king no longer heard them. He lay there, bare-chested, with his eyes closed to the world, wrapped in arms that didn't love him, but dominated him. And between sighs, moans, and whispered promises, he surrendered himself ever more deeply to his downfall. The wall began to crack, not from weapons, but from absence, a lack of faith, of direction, of clarity. The palace, once a symbol of power and order, became a labyrinth of unbridled desires, and the temple, once a center of light, became just another dark chamber where lust dressed in sanctity, and the people, without a leader, without truth, without a horizon, dispersed. In the end, there was no gold left, no songs, no kings, only the echo of a forgotten name, of a female voice that once whispered in the ear of a passionate monarch, "You will become like a god if you lie with me." And he believed. What seemed like seduction was, in fact, the coronation of a new empire, invisible, intimate, guided by hands that never wielded a sword, but that shaped empires in the warmth of sheets embroidered with lunar symbols. The woman the people called a concubine was, in truth, the architect of the fall, the sacred prostitute, the hierodule, the mother of the new world and the ancient chaos. History has always tried to erase that name. It preferred to paint the end as a consequence of male disobedience, idolatry, and sin. But it forgot, or omitted, that the king's heart was bent not by force but by desire. By a force no wall could contain, the invisible power of a woman who knew the paths between body and soul. Not an ordinary woman, not just any lover, but a priestess of sacred eroticism, trained from childhood to lead not just kings, but entire nations, to ruin or revelation. And this is the forbidden truth. The sacred prostitute was not a symbol of sin. She was an instrument of the hidden sacred, a spark of the ancient religion where pleasure was a rite, where the body was an altar, and where the feminine had the right to touch the divine with her own fingers. That's why they needed to erase her, turn her into a scandal, rewrite her history with ink stained with shame, because they knew if the people reverted to the power of the anointed woman, the order would fall. The consequence of lust was not the fall of the temple, it was the revelation of who truly supported it. While the scribes spoke of commandments, they spoke with blood. While the priests lost themselves in genealogies, they transformed saliva into liturgy. While kings thought they ruled, they were led, because hidden power has always been feminine. It has always been sensual. It has always been sacred. And you, who have come this far, may have already realized the story of the sacred prostitute isn't over. She simply changed her veil. Perhaps it's in the gaze of a woman you don't understand, in a gesture that paralyzes you, in a passion that transformed you, because there's something that destroyed temples and burned texts have never been able to erase, the mystery of touch, and it still reigns. If you smelled the lamplight, if you saw the shadows dancing on the walls, if you heard, even faintly, the lament of voices erased by history, then this wasn't just a narrative, it was an invocation, a fragment of the sacred that still pulses beneath the ashes of memory. If something inside you trembled, if the silence between one sentence and another said more than the sound itself, leave your like as if lighting a flame in a forgotten temple. Sign up, because the veils haven't completely fallen yet. The next story that is now emerging on the screen, it comes from an even older, more hidden, more alive door, and once crossed there is no return. Only click if you're ready to see what even scribes feared to write.